we start the show, we say, yeah, flattish open, but in the positive territory. Flat open, gap up opening in the green. I think, but this 0.3, 0.4, 0.5% upstart that we get in the morning accentuates to a much higher number by the time we close the day. And this morning, exactly the same story. 66,778 is the Sensex trading at right now. We are pretty close to the 67,000 levels on the Sensex. And depending on the results that come out today, because you have some heavyweight results expected today as well, we could easily breach the 67,000 figure on Sensex. And Nifty is also inching gradually closer to the 20,000 mark now. We are up about 1.5% for the last 5 days, and if you talk between yesterday and today, we are already up about give or take about 60-70 points. So right now we are trading at 19,759 on the Nifty. Now remember, these were the thresholds that got breached just about a week ago. We came into the 66,000 and 19,000 territories for Sensex and Nifty just about a week ago. And they're already up about 2% or so from those lifetime highs. And every day we are breaking these lifetime high values. Yesterday, of course, the markets were bullish, of course, with the HDFC Bank results that came out. And we saw a 30% growth in net profits. And also the merged entity of HDFC Bank and HDFC now trading as a singular entity. So Nifty Bank sort of propelled the market up. Today, not really much action on the banking stocks per se, while Nifty Bank is still up at about 0.6% or so from yesterday. We are seeing the broader markets, Sensex and Nifty, really doing well. So these are the large cap companies which are really taking the market forward today. Most traded stocks continue to be HDFC Bank, Reliance and Infosys. Reliance perhaps on account of Jio Financial Services being listed as a separate demerged entity from Reliance Industries, and it is likely, depending on how the markets perceive Jio Financial Services, it is likely that it will break into the exclusive club of Nifty 50 as well as Sensex 30. So fingers crossed on that stock per se, Jio Financial Services. What should we expect from the markets today? I think a lot is going to depend on the results that we see. IndusInd Bank, yet another banking stock, is likely to announce its earnings today on the 18th of July. Other IT stocks or banking stocks include ICICI Prudential and ICICI Lombard. These are the general life and the general insurance and the life insurance factors of ICICI. L&T Technology, again an IT company, is expected to announce its results today. So overall, I think we will have to keep an eye on the banking and the IT space all of today as well. And of course, tomorrow you've got L&T Finance, you've got Bank of Maharashtra, you've got Tata Communications, among a few others. So overall, the market is reacting well to this earnings season. If you talk about global cues, Shweta, US markets yesterday, Wall Street saw a lesser than expected run on IT results that started coming out from the US table yesterday. So IT had taken a bit of a beating and markets were expected to react negatively, but then better data came in from China, which suggested that China's growth has grown faster than again what the expectations were. So a little bit of negativity on IT stocks in US and overall earnings season, muted earnings season in US, but positive news coming from China mitigated that negativity and no real impact of global markets on Indian stocks yet. I think we are just rallying in this beautiful bull run that we are seeing right now, and let's hope it continues for longer. And earnings also pretty much in line with expectations, a tad up or down, but nothing really to scare the investors away.
Right, bulls are having a field day. As a result of which, the latest that we're also getting is the BSE listed firms and their valuation touched an all-time high of over 300 lakh crore.
3 trillion.
3 trillion, so 300 lakh crore, that's a big number.
Absolutely, Shweta. So I think, overall when markets are in a bull run, the price for every share goes up. The number of shares are not expanding, unless there's a new IPO, there is some sort of a demerger or a merger. The number of shares are not increasing on a day-to-day basis, but the same shares are being bought at a much higher price. So in a bull run, so in a bull run, market valuations are expected to soar, and we will keep getting this new data every day, beating, because markets are at an all-time high and there is trading activity. We will keep receiving these new all-time highs on valuations of companies, valuations of indices, valuation of Indian markets. I think all this is a very, very standard practice of headline grabbing that all of us engage in, and it's a feel good. But beyond that, I think it's fairly clear that as long as this bull run continues, people will continue buying shares at higher prices, which will make those shares even more expensive, and therefore the markets will keep expanding in their overall valuation.
All right, markets, as I said, bulls are having a field day. Markets are expanding, valuations increasing. We will of course keep bringing you all those updates as and when they come. But another good story that is emerging is by the way of poverty, and I'll also like to get Amit here at this point. Poverty, the data that came not just from the UN, but the fresh data that has now come in from Niti Aayog, which specifies that in the last 5 years, 135 million people have come out of poverty. But the two states that shine in all of this is Bihar and Uttar Pradesh.
They had the most amount of poverty. So the number
most
of
number of poor people.
Most number of poor people. So in percentage terms, even a small amount of people for them would be a huge percentage, or a small percentage would be a huge number.
Right.
So UP has been growing in industry terms by leaps and bounds in the last few years. Bihar is a new surprise. So obviously some good things are happening over there. But all in all, it's very good news for India. Karthik, what do you have to say to that?
Yeah, so I think let's look at these numbers in context. Number one, we are talking about the last 5 years, Shweta. So 135 million people have exited multidimensional poverty, which means it's not just income that we are talking about. It's not just cash in hand we are talking about. We are talking about education. We are talking about healthcare services, and we are talking about overall standard of living, right? So it's looking at all these multiple dimensions and not just pure play income, which gets negated on account of inflation.
So interesting. I think for the benefit of our viewers, we can reiterate this. This is multi-dimensional poverty index.
Correct.
Essentially, it's not just on account of how much money we put in hands of the people, but how their living standard, their health, their housing improves overall.
Absolutely. So if you're talking about, let's say, the per capita GDP at 2,500 rupees or something, that per capita GDP number of 2,500 would have bought you far more number of goods and services in 2015-16, which was the start date of this report, as compared to 2022, which was 2021, I'm sorry, which was the end date of this report, because of inflation growing at a 3%, 4% year-on-year compounding average. So the same amount of goods and services have become more expensive over these 5 years. Hence, the context of multidimensional is critical, that there are more number of people who have access to better health, access to better education, and their standard of living has improved, right? Now, of course, UP and Bihar had a sizable population yes, of poor people, and no surprise that these are the regions from where the maximum exit from poverty has also happened. Right. But I think if you look at the overall rural versus urban divide, that is where the story gets far more exciting. So rural decline in poverty numbers has come down from 32.6% to about 19.3%, right? So this shows that there are far fewer number of rural poor now than they were in 2015-16. Whereas the decline in urban poverty, which is primarily the urban slums, it is primarily the migrated labor working at construction sites, etc. Their standard of living, their education, their healthcare has not improved significantly. Just about 8.7% who were considered multidimensionally poor in 2015-16 have reduced only to about 5.3%. So just a 3% decline in urban poverty. And remember, urban standard of living comes at a much higher cost as well as compared to rural. So income generation in urban India has not matched to the income generation apparently in rural area. Now overall, if you talk about the number, I think from almost 25% in 2015-16, our absolute population scale poverty levels have come down to about 15%. So just 15% of a third world country, so to speak, of India is today below poverty line, and that number of 15% is a significant reduction from almost 25% 7 years ago. So I think all this data is also getting nicely corroborated that the UNDP report that came out last week said 415 million Indians have exited poverty in the last 15 years. So the data seems fairly accurate or corroborated both. There's no reason to disbelieve either of the two sets because they are justifying claims of each other. So 15 years, 415 million people exited poverty. 5 years, 135. So it's technically 1/3 only, pretty much, right?
Right.
More reasons to perhaps rejoice is also, let's say, the price report that we spoke about again a week, 10 days ago. It suggested India will be home to 1 billion middle class, not poor, not below poverty line, 1 billion middle class population by 2030. And all of this is also resonating, I feel, when you look at, let's say, the two-wheeler data, you look at the car sales, you look at home loans, you look at real estate, right? You look at even e-commerce shopping that comes every now and then, which I believe is still more of an urban than a rural phenomena. But I think all these data points corroborate fairly well that the consumption story is picking up. The consumption story has got feet to stand on and is going to be a significant driver of India's GDP going forward. And hopefully with this eradication of poverty, with more people added to the middle class, with this consumption story taking off, the dependence on the government to do the heavy lifting when it comes to investments in infrastructure, capital expenses, the heavy lifting is so far done by the government to keep the GDP figure ticking. And overall, of course, expenses on infrastructure, etc., add to the multiplier effect of the economy. But then the heavy lifting would not be specifically the government's KRA by the end of this decade, I'm hoping. And the consumption story, the real growth in the economy should have picked up fairly squarely, which means that by way of the fiscal prudence, the tax collected by the government should in time be in excess of the expenditure of the government, which means no fiscal deficit by end of this decade, rather a fiscal surplus.
Okay.
So that is the story that I am really hoping for and bullish about.
Too optimistic?
No, I think it's fairly realistic, Shweta. I think we've been a poor country for far too long. We've been an underdog for far too long. We've been an aspirational country for far too long. I think these aspirations are getting met. Finally, it's not just being aspirational, but going ahead and meeting those aspirations. And if that happens step by step, by eradication of poverty, by a booming middle class, and by this whole consumption story picking up, I think we have better days ahead. And this end of the decade would also hopefully coincide with India being the third largest economy in the world as opposed to the fifth right now.
Okay, I'm not a doomsday predictor and I don't want to dampen the sentiments, but my concern remain with respect to the fact that it is still so uneven. The wealth is so unevenly distributed. From the numbers that you quoted, people who have come out of poverty in rural areas is far too high. It is still to the point of 19.3% as opposed to urban area, whereas it's approximately 5% or lower. My concern is that a far share of the profit of growth is being given, or the fruit is being given to people living in urban areas as opposed to rural area, and therefore the unequitable distribution of wealth and progress.
See, there's no denying, Shweta, that there is income inequality in the country, right? But I would again like to look at the reduction in rural poverty from 32% to 19%. It's a significant reduction. The number is still, in absolute terms, the number is high. But in comparative terms, compare that with the urban figures, reducing from 8.7% to 5.3%, there has been greater eradication of poverty in rural areas than in urban areas, number one. Just a counter view to what you're saying. However, I think income inequality is a fact and is a reason, for corrective action to be continued to be taken and to be initiated if it is not being taken right now. But I believe, again, if you look at the absolute numbers declining from about 24.9, 25% to about 15%, yes, we are eradicating poverty. We are not technically hitting the inequality yet. Now, I think inequality also, I believe, is a function of the fabric of the society. Are you a capitalist country? Are you a socialist country? Are you there to penalize the big corporations and the high net worth individuals just because they put more skin in the game by making those supernormal profits at the cost of maybe encouraging others to contribute in equal measure to the India growth story? So I think in a country like China and a country like Russia, which have largely been communist or socialist states, there is a wider spread of that overall income generated. But socialism is unlikely, in my mind, to bear the fruits of development as fast as capitalism would. So I believe, yes, there is enough and more merit in keeping corporate tax rates, I believe, higher than income tax rates. And that is a course correction that the government or any subsequent governments that come to power should do. You can't have corporate India taxed at 25% and the average middle class Indian taxed at 30%. Right. So that correction in corporate tax versus income tax should hopefully augur a little better for this income inequality to go. I think the tax on super rich, all cess, etc., everything included, reducing from 42% to 37% was not a great step taken. If anything, it could have gone from 42 to 43% in a bit to slightly compensate the larger tax net of the country, the middle class, which pays the bulk of the income tax. So I believe you're right. A lot needs to be done when we talk about income inequality. But at the same time, a lot needs to be celebrated for abject poverty, multidimensional poverty going away, exiting, and this looming middle class, which is going to add to the consumption story.
All right. So it is a growth story, and it's a growth story of India. So something there to celebrate. Obviously, Karthik and I continue to be divided on how, and I think we continue to be united on how perhaps we should treat inequality, and we need to do better there. But good numbers coming in there by the way of poverty and India's progress that India has shown as far as uplifting people out of abject poverty is concerned. But shifting focus to another important sector that we're tracking at this point in time, which is the aviation sector. News coming in that the much awaited merger of Air India Vistara is on track. Staff is, it's starting to merge. The road, I don't see there's any roadblock that exists at this point in time. So I think the road ahead is clear for the merger to go through, and this is it's just started now.
So Shweta, I think there wasn't really an anticipated roadblock, but there were certain clearances required. You needed a clearance from DGCA.
Of course.
You needed a clearance from Competition Commission of India, CCI, right? And CCI, as we know, has been going hammer and tongs on big tech in the US doing business in India. Google being, of course, right in the claws pretty much and the jaws of CCI, talking about antitrust and violation of fair practice and monopolistic trade. So I think what CCI was trying to decipher and arrive at was the fact that if this merger were to go through, Air India and Vistara, and this becomes the overall Air India combined story that we talk about, then is it going to be in a position to be a monopolistic player, and will it be able to eventually cartelize prices? And if that is the case, then CCI would not have given its nod. But I believe we have an equally strong player in IndiGo, which is in fact the market leader, running one single airline called IndiGo, as opposed to the Air India, the Tata group running Air India, Vistara, Air Asia, and in talks with Singapore Airlines as well. So it's a much larger number of airlines being run by the Tata Group as compared to a single airline called IndiGo being run by Interglobe Aviation. So as long as there are these two dominant players in the market providing pretty much a homogeneous service, which is aviation, travel from point of origin to point of destination, of course add or subtract some frills which come at a certain cost, but beyond that, as long as there are two dominant players in the market, then creation of a monopoly is unrealistic. And I think that has come in way of the nod from CCI that now the sky is clear for the merger of Air India and Vistara.
And there were of course reports and the reason why I said the road ahead looks clear, there isn't a roadblock, because there were reports that there are antitrust issues that regulator has raised. Although these were unconfirmed reports, now that the merger is going through, Amit, it appears that those concerns have also been catered to, if at all there were concerns.
Well, all the concerns were basically quelled by the Vistara CEO, Mr. Kannan. So there were concerns on that front, and then there were concerns in the market with what happened in the case of Go First, that the lessors had become cautious towards the Indian market. In the case of Go First, they were unable to, they had problems repossessing their assets. Also, this was added to by the interest rates rise and the appreciation of the dollar with respect to the rupee. So all these concerns were basically quelled by the CEO, Mr. Kannan of Vistara. And with respect to CCI, they had both the airlines had filed their whatever applications. It takes 270 days, CCI. Then they have NCLT approval, which takes 9 to 12 months. That was also applied few months ago. Then there, as Karthik mentioned there are approvals from regulatory approvals from DGCA, MOCA, AOC. They are expecting the integration to go through latest by October of 2024, earliest by April of 2024. So that is where it stands. And with respect to duopoly, in the same press meet, Mr. Kannan said, duopoly is not what you should be talking about. What they are concerned about, that one airline has 63% of the market share.
And that is their competitor.
And that is their competitor. And they are way down at 25 combined. So that is their concern. So that is the gap they want to basically fill up.
And it's not just them, it's also Akasa CEO who's saying, don't talk about duopoly because we also
we're there, we're very much alive and kicking.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly, data that came out a few days back, Shweta, suggested that Akasa has eaten pretty much the lion's share of the very, not a very sizable, but a very thin, trim, diet-sized slice of the Go First cake in the overall pie of aviation. So I think a lion's chunk of that has actually been eaten by Akasa. And Akasa's announcements a few days ago also suggesting that it is on the verge of placing a triple-digit aircraft order, which means a minimum of 100 new aircraft, is a fairly sizable feat and sizable fleet for a new entrant and pretty much a newbie in the aviation space. So overall, I think, yeah, the aviation story is becoming more and more interesting in India. But I still believe, contrary to what is being reported, Amit, in through Mr. Kannan and the executives at Akasa, that whatever we do, we are pretty much in a duopolistic aviation market already. When you have a 63-64% market share of IndiGo and about a 25% market share of this Air India Tata Group airlines combined, we are talking about almost a 90% market share commanded by two significant players. And I think the typical definition of duopoly says that if 80% of the market is controlled by two players,
then that is a duopoly.
So price cartelization, bending the rules of engagement, getting preferential treatment on parking, getting preferential treatment on landing, getting preferential treatment across the board on gates, on on even air bridges as compared to buses. These are little things that add to consumer experience, customer experience. And if these two sizable operators are able to negotiate much better customer experiences at the airport, lesser walk for passengers, better facilities, gates which are better equipped, all of these are going to make them preferred options to fly. So there might not be, we have a fairly robust watchdog in CCI as well as DGCA, but everything need not really be a tangible cost cartelization. It could be an experience cartelization as well. Right. So if you're able to cartelize the experience,
that's an interesting term.
Yeah, I mean, if you're able to work on the softer side, I mean, your aircraft taking
Just
off on time,
absolutely.
your aircraft being taxied and taken to the runway faster than, let's say, an Akasa or a SpiceJet, or if and when the Go First flights
Comes
return.
back, yeah.
So, if you're able to live up to this everyday routine of taking off on time, landing on time, getting aero bridges, getting better gates with better seating, closer to, let's say, the boarding gates, etc. Overall, you will be able to draw in a much better experience, and people will prefer to even pay a 10%, 5% delta over the next competitor to be assured that you're going to get this experience. And that is what is going to drive out competition. So I think the risk of duopoly, in my understanding, is not going to be limited to only price cartelization. It'll be well beyond that.
I think what has amounted to the optimism that has been shown by Akasa is everything has turned out just right for them. They came at a time when Spice wasn't a problem and Go First was in the problem. So there was a vacuum that they were able to fill up. The journey from here will be slightly more difficult because now they are up against the big players.
Right.
Yeah. So their optimism is justified to a point that it is not a duopoly. But let's hope it does not become one, and let's hope they do what they're saying that they will do. So it will be 119 after the 100 come in, if it is a minimum of 100.
If it is minimum 100.
But it continues to be, it's mind-boggling, the number of aircraft that Indian aviation players are buying. Perhaps, I don't know if there's a comparison at an all-time high, from Airbus to Boeing. The order book that Air India Vistara is looking at with IndiGo and now with Akasa. Do we need these many aircrafts? And if yes, do we have these many airports? Do we have the capacity for these many flights?
So I think, Shweta, it's a chicken and egg situation, right? It's pretty much the same debate of do we get electric vehicles because we don't have chargers? Or should we first install the chargers and work on the highways and then get the EVs? So I think it's a similar story.
Right.
So I believe with Mission Udan that the government had embarked upon, many new small airports have mushroomed, but there's very limited traffic to those airports, right? Now, who is to blame for that? Is it because those airports are not in capital cities or not in very centrally connected cities? Or is it because there isn't enough demand for carriers to fly passengers to those cities, and hence, you reduce your number of flights and eventually cut them out altogether? So I think it all worked in tandem. You had airports coming up, parallelly you also had road infrastructure coming up. In fact, Nitin Gadkari went on record when the expressway to your respective hometowns, Dehradun, got inaugurated. He went and he said at the inauguration of the highway that I believe that people will stop using the Jolly Grant airport in Dehradun because connectivity from Delhi by road is so amazing that you wouldn't really need to take a flight. So all of this is working in parallel. You've got road highways also coming up. You've got airports coming up. Airports not as frequented right now.
My problem with airports in tier 2, tier 3 cities is that they were built with a lot of fanfare when Udan was launched. But since then, they haven't been serviced. They haven't been used as much, primarily because there's lesser demand. And all of that on the back of the fact that it costs you a bomb and you have to shell a lot more money if you are to take a flight. Until that is catered to, I'm assuming from a point of view of a user, I am more likely to go by road or train as opposed to take the aircraft or take to air.
Sure. So let's stick to your Dehradun example only for now. My Dehradun example, your cities, right? So just a disclaimer there. So let's stick to Dehradun.
Okay.
Now imagine a situation if Infosys was to set up a 5,000 member employee base office in Dehradun, right? Imagine if an EV plant was to come up in a neighboring city en route to Dehradun, right? Haridwar already has a lot of factories, so I'm saying somewhere between, closer to Dehradun, between Haridwar and Dehradun, right? If there was a big EV factory to be set up there, there was an IT company like Infosys setting up shop there, right? There was another IT company like TCS setting up shop. Overall, if you have more economic activity in a region, it is going to attract more number of passengers, right? It will entail more number of people traveling for business and traveling to place of work and place of home in holidays, using any means of transport, right? So I think it is all again linked to development, industrial development of cities that have airports. Now again, one could argue that isn't it better to wait for the industrial activity to pick up before the infrastructure is built? But I think that is the chronic mistake we have made in our country, that we have always thought of infrastructure later. Cities have developed, satellite cities have mushroomed, and we have always been troubled with roads, with bus stops, with waterlogging, with civic issues of all kinds, right? I think for once we had the opportunity that the government did go and make these capex investments in building infrastructure first, in the hope that cities would develop. Now tomorrow, if a city like Amravati, which was touted to be the capital of Andhra Pradesh, eventually did not become one, if it has an airport, if it has road connectivity, whether or not it is a capital, now the capital is going to be Vizag, whether or not it is a capital city, will still encourage more number of industries to be set up there because the infrastructure is already in place. So I think with this whole order book of airlines, which we started the story with and we digress significantly. So with this whole order book of airlines and with these multiple pockets of airports infrastructure being developed, I think by the time the aircraft order comes, we would have seen far more industrialization also. And since the main hubs of industrialization are already choked, there are going to be land incentives, there are going to be labor incentives for industries to deploy capital to these cities which have the infrastructure, and that should justify this large order book in time.
All right. So my only concern being hopefully many of these airports should not be languishing in absence of passengers or aircrafts
linked directly to economic activity,
and
I
linked
believe.
directly.
Two kinds of things are happening. Some of them, as you say, may be languishing, but some cities which needed an airport and were using Air Force bases, Pune, Allahabad, I can name two. Now they are having their own airports that are being built. That is coming up. There was a huge controversy that Adani has taken up so many airports. Those are coming up. Then all the big cities are getting their second airports. Bombay is getting one in Panvel.
Yeah.
Noida is getting its own. So and a whole lot of infrastructure is developing. A few days back, there was news that tier 2 cities are the target of consultancy and IT companies next, because these cities are choked. I can give you an example. There is a place called Chak Ganjaria near Lucknow, which is getting a HCL city. It has been getting for some time, but now it is close to fruition. So it is happening parallelly, maybe in a little haphazard manner. So basically we see something happening and we see, okay, is it going to basically languish, or is it actually going to basically give some results and some profits to airlines so they can basically function and not go the way some airlines did go in the past. So yeah, it's like chicken and egg. So some things are happening faster, some things are happening slower. Hopefully all of them will catch up.
Okay, hopefully all of them will catch up. And since you gave an example of how the two-wheeler or EV industry is headed, another important news that is coming in, and I'll come to Amit for this, another important piece of update, Amit, that is coming in, and we've been discussing FAME subsidy, we've been discussing, I mean, we will of course run through all of that for the benefit of our viewers, how FAME subsidy was partially rolled back and completely rolled back for players who were found to be in violation of the localization norm, which essentially meant that these companies were asked to localize 50% of their vehicle. They did not do so. In fact, they continued getting the subsidy for 2 years, and government is now saying pay us back or we will take you to court. We now have an update. We know that EV maker Revolt is going to give back to the government about 44 crore rupees.
Yes. Okay, so there were, like we discussed yesterday, there were 6 or 7 companies that were in question, who the government Ministry of Heavy Industries had sought explanation from to basically give back the subsidy. Hero Electric has been given 10 days extension to file basically their reply. They have they've been asked to pay back 133 crores.
Okay, that's a larger share of the pie.
Ampere, which is a part of Greaves Cotton, has to pay 124 crores. Ampere and Okinawa has to pay 116 crores. The other three companies are, one is Benning India, one is Ammo Electric, and one is Lohia Auto. These three companies have agreed in principle to pay back. So it is Revolt plus these three. Four companies have agreed. So Hero Electric, Ampere and Okinawa are the three companies which owe the most amount of money, more or less, where the replies are still awaited by the government, whether they are okay to pay or whether they will basically go through a legal route or basically contesting this amount that they've been asked to pay back.
Right.
So that is how things stand right now. They have been given 10 days extension.
So all 7 OEMs, in fact,
and the total amount that the government will be collecting from these 7 companies will be 469
crores. I was coming to that. All 7 OEMs who have been found to be in violation of the localization norm, who have been penalized by the government. Government is now saying pay us back an amount to the tune of 469 crores. It is going to be a big bummer for these companies. Why? Because we've been talking to them and we know for a fact that they may not be able to survive this blow. Many of them have agreed, others are of course contesting it.
So Shweta, 136 I think you said for
40.
Hero Electric? 133 crore for a group backed by Hero? Not a very huge amount. I think there has been hue and cry over it. In fact, you spoke to Sohinder Gill, who's also the president of the Society of Automobile Electric EV
and a
manufacturers,
representative of Hero,
and he's the CEO of Hero Electric. So,
although they may be backed by Hero, he made it very clear on record that we are not Hero, we are Hero Electric. So we are a subsidiary.
Of course.
And if we are asked to pay back, we may not be able to survive.
If funding is required, immediate survival funding is required. Oxygen, as he said, if oxygen is required, it is part of the family. An oxygen cylinder or a concentrator will be provided for, right? So I believe while yes, I think it's not about a few companies surviving, a few companies going bankrupt, a few companies just about managing somewhere in between. I think it's a function of clarity and consistency in policy and clarity and consistency in disbursement of the subsidies. So a proper investigation, to my mind, is definitely a need of the hour to understand, was the localization mandate, which is where this whole issue stemmed from, was it ever clearly stated? Was battery manufacturing ever clearly stated before subsidies were doled out? And if it wasn't the case, and even if there was a revision later, why did the government then clear the checks and these subsidies then got offered, right?
Absolutely.
So overall, I think a larger consistency in policy is required so that players who want to stay in the market or want to enter the market now should have a long-term horizon of what is the amount of subsidy that they will get and what are the very specific clauses under which those subsidies can be availed. Now we talk about phased manner production, we talk about PLI, and we talk about FAME. These are 3 critical subsidies which work in this entire EV ecosystem. FAME being for the end consumer, PLI being for those who want to set up manufacturing units, and the phased manufacturing plan PMP is for the intermediaries like Hero Electric who are procuring from somewhere, selling to somebody, right? So, and basically taking care of the assembly. So overall, very clear guidelines need to be in place for each player availing any subsidy so that a business decision can be taken on the rationale of consistency rather than ad hocism. So no change in policy, no change in stance, no undercutting localization versus battery manufacturing versus procuring from outside, etc. I think a very clear message has to go out from the government of India that we are consistent on this policy because it eventually results in the fate of many investments being done in the country which are not going to sustain.
Yes, because it doesn't look good good for business, Karthik.
It doesn't look good for business. So any outsider who wants to come and invest in India, in the EV story in India, is going to wait and watch the policy architecture and will be on tender hooks that, hey, let me start small, let me do a little bit of investment, let me not invest directly, let me go through some other partner and mitigate this risk. I think that freedom from the fear of risk is very critical for industry to thrive. And that has to come through very clearly in the form of long-term policy statements, which pretty much sign a memorandum that this policy is not going to be changed for the next 3 years, for the next 5 years. Give it a timeline that I'm not going to tinker with this policy until that timeline. And business decisions then and the risk then needs to be taken, knowing that consistency.
All right, and firm checks and balances in place.
But I think Hero Electric per se, you asked me that question, I think 133 crores is not going to be something which is going to run them out of business. I think that interim funding can easily be sought. And everybody knows the EV two-wheeler story is doing well and will continue hopefully to do
I mean, at
better.
least for the other 6 players, it's doing very well. For the 7 players here, we don't know. We don't know whether Okinawa or whether Revolt or Hero Electric will be able to survive it or not. On record, at least, they've told us that we may not be able to survive this. We haven't produced for 4 months, and if asked to pay back anything to the tune of about 100 crore rupees and upwards, we may not be able to survive. Now, we will of course have to wait and watch out for. We don't know whether they agree with us, whether they'll be able to get this funding from their parent company or not. But not good news there for at least 7 two-wheeler EV makers. But out of the remainder 6 companies that are doing really well is Ola. And we now know Ola, Amit, is looking or going for an IPO anytime now.
That's the good way.
Ola Electric, to be clear.
So, Ola's valuations had come down. A successful IPO will basically just put them back on track.
That's the parent company I think you're talking about, not Ola Electric.
Oh, okay, yeah. Right? But yeah, so again, the parent this thing. But yeah, Karthik will correct me on that.
Right, but
yeah.
I mean, Ola Electric going for an IPO, to begin with, let's first understand Ola being a competitor to all the existing EV players out there, and of course selling Ola S1 for I think a price point which is slightly more
under a lakh when it started selling in 2021. Now it is
it's more than
it's a
lakh,
premium product
of
now.
course, and because for the fact that the 40% subsidy on the upfront price of the vehicle has been revised downward to 15%, which essentially means that Ola S1 is now a little more, I think a lot more expensive to people who want to buy it, a little more maybe for people who have it, but a lot more expensive, about 30,000 rupees more expensive for people who want to buy it. It's a premium product, but there is success that Ola Electric has seen so far. It's one of the only remainder players that continues to get.
So it's one of the 50% of the remainder players who
Ather,
have not
Ola,
been found of any wrongdoing in the subsidy game.
And of the 6 of them, Ather and Ola continue to be the top competitors for whatever the market share is.
That's right. In fact, when data came late last month, in the month of June, Ola was pretty much topping the charts. Ola Electric was the highest selling electric two-wheeler scooter, electric scooter brand. This again on the back, like you mentioned, of Hero Electric and others cutting down on production, waiting for the subsidy battle to ebb out. So yeah, I think broadly, Ola Electric started selling EVs in 2021 and was hoping for an IPO in 4 to 5 years from the time of operations, right? So 25-26 would have been a more realistic horizon for listing on the share markets as per Bhavish Agarwal back then. But a report from Bloomberg suggests that it could be much sooner because apparently the market has matured and the company has grown and matured much faster than expected. Not unexpected for us because we've seen last year we breached 1 million units in sales for electric scooters alone. And from the time Ola Electric started selling in late 2021, it sold about 240,000 electric scooters already. And these are of course upwards of 1 lakh each. 1 lakh of rupees each. So the order book has been good. 240,000 electric scooters, which is almost a 250,000 units, have been sold over the last under 2 years since its operations. Right. So it has been a sizable player in this overall e-scooter story of India. In addition to that, by end of this year, electric motorcycles, not scooters, electric motorcycles are likely to be launched. And we have been talking about an electric four-wheeler, a small compact electric car from Ola's stable. And the report from Bloomberg also suggests that 2024, next year, is when we could see an Ola electric four-wheeler also drive into Indian roads. Now, all of this, the electric...
would be very interesting to see.
Yeah, it's very interesting to see. And Ola scooters are not going to be limited to sale in India alone, but Ola is looking at even the export market, including Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Europe.
All right, and Ola Electric currently has 38% of the total share of the market, which is substantial, which is almost, I mean, that's almost
38% with only
1/3
of the players operating. So,
with only 50%.
I would
But
not
that's
look
still-
at it holistically in an annualized context. I would
Okay.
look at it as a month-on-month data.
All right, but the share that it has acquired since December 2021 still significant when compared to other players, because other players were still selling up until about 4 months ago. So a good news there, of course, for Ola Electric, and it is continuing to expand its kitty. They will be launching a motorcycle very soon, as Karthik pointed out. It could also be launching a four-wheeler. We'll also have to wait and watch out for how that pans out and how an uptake in the market will be for a four-wheeler. But of course, I think market is maturing for four-wheeler electric vehicles. We'll touch more on that. But I suppose that's all we have in this bulletin. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Shweta.
He thought he could outlast us. And 1 year later, the evidence is right here in this room.
Who will blink first?
So far from preventing the expansion of NATO, Russian actions have actually resulted in the expansion of NATO.
It's a mess for Russia and it's a mess for the Western world, for NATO and the United States.
Putin is a dictator, and if he loses, that means the end of his regime, and probably of him personally. So he has to keep going.
Year 2, no end in sight.